Someone found a cigar box of old fishing lures in their late father-in-law's garage last spring and almost put the whole thing out for the trash truck. A neighbor stopped by, took one look inside, and offered $40 on the spot for the box. She said no. She looked closer. Inside was a single lure, glass eyes, flaking red paint, 5 treble hooks hanging off a wooden body shaped like a frog. That one lure sold 3 weeks later for just over $6,000. There are 10 old fishing lures from the 1950s, some even older, that collectors are actively hunting in 2026, and most of them look exactly like junk. Chipped paint, rusted hooks, faded stamps you can barely read. One of them on this list regularly sells for more than a used car. Another one is so easy to mistake for a flea market throwaway that people have genuinely tossed 5-figure lures into a free box at estate sales without knowing it. Before you sell a tackle box for $10 at your next garage sale, before you let your grandfather's old fishing gear go to a stranger for pocket change, watch this whole video. I'll be glad to take a look and tell you if it's worth a second look before it's worth nothing. Here's why this matters more right now than it did even 5 years ago. Vintage tackle collecting used to be a small, quiet hobby. Mostly older fishermen trading at regional tackle shows nobody outside the hobby ever heard about. That's changed. Online auction platforms opened this market up to buyers all over the world, and prices on the rarest pieces have climbed steadily every single year for the last decade. At the same time, an entire generation of estate cleanouts is happening right now. As the fishermen who actually used this gear in the 1940s and 1950s pass their tackle, boxes down to kids and grandkids who never learned to fish and have no idea what they're holding. That combination, rising demand and a flood of unidentified supply, is exactly why so many of these lures are still turning up for a few dollars at yard sales, even as the top examples sell for life-changing money at auction. So keep 2 things in mind as we go through this list. First, condition matters enormously. A lure with cracked paint, a snapped hook hanger, or a body that's warped from decades of damp storage is worth a fraction of a clean example. Sometimes 10% or less of what the same lure would bring in excellent shape. Second, and this trips up more people than anything else, never assume you can tell a lure's age or rarity just by how worn it looks. A heavily fished, beat-up lure can still be an early, rare example worth real money, while a lure that looks shiny and new might just be a common piece from a later mass-produced run. The details that actually matter, hardware style, eye type, belly stamps, hook hanger design, are small, and they're easy to miss if you don't know to look for them. Let's start at number 10. Heddon Vamp lures sit in tackle boxes all over the country right now, and most owners have no idea what they're looking at. They see a slightly odd-shaped wooden minnow, a little heavier than the modern plastic lures at the sporting goods store, maybe a bit dull under the dust. They toss it in a $5 bin without a second thought. Here's what they're missing. The Vamp was one of James Heddon's most successful designs. Produced from the early 1900s clear through the 1950s in dozens of color patterns, collectors now call finishes. The wooden body, the glass eyes, the cup and screw hardware holding the hooks in place. Every piece of that was hand-assembled in a factory in Dowagiac, Michigan. At a time when a fishing lure was built like a piece of furniture, not stamped out of a mold in seconds. Pick one up and look at the belly. If you see a weight stamped into the wood or a diamond-shaped marking, you may be holding an early production run. Rare color combinations, the ones collectors call rainbow or fire chief or frog spot, can push a clean example into the hundreds of dollars. A pristine early Vamp in the original 2-piece box, with the correct paper insert and unfished hooks, has sold for over $1,000 at specialty auctions. The Creek Chub Bait Company out of Garrett, Indiana, built one of the most recognizable lures of the early 20th century, and it's still swimming through estate sales completely misunderstood. The Pikie minnow looks simple at first glance. Long, slender wooden body, a metal lip at the front called a diving lip, 2 or 3 treble hooks along the belly and tail. People see the size, assume it's a bass lure that somebody's uncle bought at a hardware store decades ago, and price it like scrap. What they're not looking at is the mouth. Early Pikie minnows have a distinctive glass eye set, and the earliest versions, before Creek Chubs switched to painted eyes in the 1940s, are what collectors chase hardest. Flip it over. If the belly has a weighted wagtail stamp or the specific hardware pattern used before 1932, you may be holding a lure worth considerably more than the going rate for a used one. Color matters enormously here. Standard perch and frog finishes are common and sell modestly, usually in the $20 to $50 range for a nice used example. But rare finishes, the ones called Allen Stroker Special or certain novelty colors made in small runs, have sold for well over $1,000 when the paint is bright and the body shows no cracking. Here's the trap people fall into. A Pikie minnow that's been touched up, repainted by a well-meaning previous owner to make it look fresh, loses almost all of its collector value. Original paint, even chipped and faded, is worth infinitely more to a serious buyer than a repaint that looks perfect. If you've got one, and you're tempted to make it look nicer before selling it, leave it exactly as you found it. There's a second detail that trips people up with early Creek Chub lures specifically, and it has nothing to do with the lure itself. It's the box. Creek Chub used printed boxes with a distinctive logo, and the earliest versions of that box design are almost as collected as the lures that came inside them. A common Pikie minnow paired with a rare early box can sell for more than a rare Pikie minnow with no box at all, because box collectors and lure collectors are often two different groups of buyers competing for the same estate sale find. If you're clearing out an old fishing collection, keep every box you find nearby, even the ones that look empty or damaged, until you've matched them up with whatever lures were stored alongside them. That instinct to clean up a lure before selling it costs people real money, and it's about to cost them even more with the next one on this list, because this next lure was nearly worthless new and is now one of the most quietly expensive names in the hobby. Most people have never heard of this one, and that's exactly why it's still findable. Shakespeare, the same company that later became known for rods and reels, produced a series of early wooden lures in the first decades of the 1900s. And the Revolution bait is one of the strangest and rarest of the bunch. It doesn't look like a fish at all. It's shaped almost like a small wooden torpedo with propeller-style metal blades at both ends, designed to spin and flash as it moved through the water, mimicking the disturbance of a wounded bait fish rather than the shape of one. Because it looks unusual, and because most people today only recognize lures that look like fish, the Revolution bait gets sorted into weird old junk piles constantly. People genuinely don't know it's a fishing lure at all sometimes. It shows up in general antique bins, in with old hardware, priced at $2 or $3 because the seller assumed it was some kind of tool part. Collectors who specialize in early Shakespeare tackle actively search flea markets and estate sales specifically for pieces like this, because so few examples survive in good condition. The propeller blades bend easily and are frequently missing entirely on surviving examples, which makes a complete, undamaged Revolution bait genuinely scarce. Depending on condition and finish, these have sold in the low hundreds up through several $1,000s for the rarest documented color variations with original blades intact. If you find a small wooden, torpedo-shaped object with metal propeller blades and hook hardware in an old tackle box, don't assume it's a broken toy or a strange tool. Set it aside and look closer before you decide it's worthless. Speaking of things that don't look like what they are, the next lure on this list is famous for exactly the opposite problem. Everyone recognizes it. Almost nobody realizes how much the right version is worth. If you've ever been fishing at night for bass, you already know the sound this lure makes. That distinctive blup 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 as the cupped metal lip drags across the surface. The jitterbug has been in continuous production since the early 1940s, which is exactly why most people assume every jitterbug they find is just an ordinary, common, low-value lure. Most are. That's true. A standard modern-era plastic jitterbug in a common color is worth a few dollars at most. But the early wooden jitterbugs, produced by the Arbogast company before the switch to plastic construction, are a completely different animal to collectors. Here's what separates them. Early wooden jitterbugs have glass eyes rather than painted ones, a specific two-piece metal lip design, and often a slightly different body profile than the later plastic runs. One in your hand. Wood feels different than plastic even through paint, denser in an inconsistent way, slightly warmer to the touch. If the lure has glass eyes and feels like real wood under the paint, you may be holding a lure from the earliest production era. Rare color patterns push value even higher. A bullfrog or perch finish wooden jitterbug in genuinely excellent original condition. Minimal fishing wear, correct hardware throughout, has sold at specialty auction for well into 4 figures. Even honestly, used examples from the wooden era, with real fishing wear and a couple of replaced hooks, still brings solid money from collectors who want a working piece of history rather than a shelf display. The mistake people make with jitterbugs specifically is assuming familiarity equals low value. Recognizing a lure instantly is not the same as knowing what it's worth. Slow down before you price something just because you've seen it 100 times before.